Please, someone help her." The voice came from the direction of the pharmacy counter. Thin and desperate, the kind of voice that cuts through grocery store noise the way a fire alarm cuts through sleep. Most people didn't look up. A woman in a yellow raincoat steered her cart around the commotion. A man in a business suit glanced once, then resumed scrolling his phone. Two teenagers in the chip aisle turned toward the sound for exactly 2 seconds, then turned back. Harriet Voss. No, wait. Loretta Simpson. No. She had been standing near the vitamin display, holding a small bottle of calcium supplements in one hand and a folded piece of paper in the other. The paper was a list. It was written in someone else's handwriting, her daughter's handwriting, rushed and slanted, done in the 10 minutes before work. Calcium, fish oil, the fiber powder in the orange canister, not the green one. Don't forget the bread. Her name was June Calloway, 71 years old. White hair pinned up unevenly in the back, a winter coat that was clean but had seen better decades, orthopedic shoes on feet that had been swollen since March. She moved slowly, not because she was frail, but because her left hip had been replaced 18 months ago, and she had never quite trusted it again. She heard the voice and stopped. 2 aisles over, near the blood pressure monitors, an old man had collapsed against the display rack, cuffs and monitors scattered on the linoleum. He was on his knees, one hand pressed flat to the floor, the other gripping a shelf that was pulling away from the wall with his weight. His face was the color of old wax. A younger woman, maybe 30, was crouched beside him, her voice cracking. He just went down. Can someone help? Please? 12 people in that section of the store. June counted later. She counted the way people do after something happens, when they're trying to understand what they witnessed. 12 people. A pharmacist behind glass who looked up and immediately looked back at her screen. A stock boy who stopped his cart in the aisle, watched for 3 seconds, and then slowly pushed on. A man with his son on his shoulders who turned the entire family unit around and headed for a different aisle entirely. June had a bad hip. She had a list in someone else's handwriting. She had been on her feet for 40 minutes, and she could feel it in her lower back. She put the calcium bottle in her cart and walked toward the man on the floor. His name, she would learn later, was Otis Beaumont, already on the list. She needed a new name. His name was Russell Vane, 74 years old, retired. He had driven himself to the store to pick up one thing, just one. He was down to his last blood pressure pill and had miscounted, and now it had been 2 days. And he knew, the way people who have lived in their bodies for 7 decades know, that something was wrong. June knelt beside him. Her hip screamed. She ignored it. "Sir, can you hear me? Look at me, right here." His eyes found hers. They were brown and frightened and deeply embarrassed. The embarrassment was almost worse to see than the fear. "I'm fine," he said. "I just need a minute. You don't look fine." June looked up at the young woman crouching nearby. "Has anyone called 911? I was about to, but I didn't know if. Call, right now. Go." The woman pulled out her phone and stepped away. June looked back at Russell. She put her hand over his, the one gripping the shelf. His knuckles were white. "Let the shelf go. I've got you." He looked at her like he wasn't sure he believed that. She didn't blame him. She was a 71-year-old woman with uneven hair and an orthopedic shoe. She was not the rescue anyone pictured. But she didn't let go. Before that moment, before the pharmacy aisle, before Russell Vane's hand in hers, let me tell you who June Calloway was. Because who someone is always the reason for what they do. And June's story is the kind that's easy to overlook. The kind people walk right past, the same way they walked past Russell on that floor. June had been a home health aide for 31 years. Not a nurse, not a doctor, a home health aide. The person who shows up when someone can't button their own shirt anymore. When someone needs help getting from the bed to the bathroom, and there's no family close enough to help. When someone is dying slowly in a back bedroom, and the only human warmth in their day is the hour or two. When June walked through the door, she had done that work for 31 years. She had held the hands of people as they left this world. She had sat with widows who hadn't spoken to another person in 4 days. She had driven 80-year-olds to chemotherapy in her own car when their rides fell through. She had done it for wages that, at their peak, barely crossed $17 an hour. She retired 2 years ago, not because she wanted to, because her body said enough. Now she lived with her daughter Patrice in a brick house in Dayton, Ohio. Patrice was 38. She worked 2 jobs. She was kind and stretched thin and always exhausted. And she loved her mother fiercely, in the way people love things they don't have enough time for. The guest bedroom had floral wallpaper from 1987 that neither of them had gotten around to changing. June slept under 3 blankets because she ran cold now. On her nightstand, a library book, a glass of water, a photograph of her late husband Gerald, taken in 1989 at a barbecue, laughing at something off camera. Gerald had been gone 11 years. June had figured out how to get up in the morning without him, which was its own kind of daily accomplishment she never got credit for. She had one luxury: Wednesday mornings. Patrice worked early, so June took the car, drove herself to the grocery store, moved at her own pace, had a cup of tea at the little cafe table near the front entrance, read a few pages of whatever she was borrowing from the library. It was the one stretch of the week that belonged entirely to her. This was a Wednesday morning. She had been thinking when she heard the voice about whether Gerald would have liked the fish oil capsules, or whether he would have said they smelled like a bait shop and refused. He probably would have said that. She almost smiled. Then she heard, "Please, someone help her." The voice came from the direction of the pharmacy counter, and she stopped smiling. Now she was on the floor next to a man she didn't know, holding his hand while the shelf he'd been gripping slowly stabilized. The paramedics arrived in 6 minutes. In those 6 minutes, June talked to Russell the way she had talked to patients for 31 years. Not over him, not about him, to him. She asked him his name. She asked if he had family she should call. She asked how long it had been since he'd taken his medication. She kept her voice level and her hands steady, and she did not leave. When the paramedics lifted him onto the stretcher, one of them looked at June and said, "You stay with him this whole time?" She said, "Yes." He nodded like that meant something. It did. Russell looked at her from the stretcher. His color was coming back. The fear was still there, but the embarrassment had shifted into something else, something quieter. "Thank you," he said. She patted his hand once. "You're going to be fine. They're going to take good care of you." She meant it. She knew enough about bodies and about care to know when something was going to be all right, and she knew this was going to be all right. She stood up. Her hip sent a sharp complaint up her left side. She put her hand to the shelf where Russell had been gripping and breathed through it. Then she picked up her grocery list and finished shopping. She did not think of herself as having done anything remarkable. She had seen a person who needed help. She knew how to help people. She helped him. This was simply Tuesday logic to her. Or Wednesday logic in this case. At the cafe table near the entrance, she had her tea. She read 4 pages of her book. A man across from her was on his phone, loud, complaining about traffic. She did not make eye contact. She finished her tea, gathered her bags, drove home. She forgot her fish oil on the shelf by the blood pressure monitors. She didn't realize until she was unpacking at home, and she laughed at herself, a short, quiet laugh. Because what could you do? She put it on the list for next Wednesday. 3 days passed. On Saturday morning, Patrice was at work. June was in the kitchen making oatmeal and listening to the radio at low volume, an old habit from the years when Gerald used to sleep late, and she'd try not to wake him. She moved around the kitchen in those early morning rhythms that 60 years of living build into a person, automatic and quiet. The doorbell rang. She turned the burner to low and went to the door. The man on the porch was younger than she expected, mid-40s, jacket and slacks, not a suit, but the kind of neat casual that signals someone who is used to being taken seriously. He held a manila envelope in both hands and stood with a stillness that wasn't nervous, the stillness of someone who has delivered important things before. "Mrs. Calloway?" "Yes. My name is Daryl Hines. I work for Russell Vane. He asked me to come by." June stood very still. Russell Vane, the man from the pharmacy floor, the man with the white knuckles and the frightened brown eyes. Is he all right? He's doing well, ma'am. Much better. He wanted me to thank you in person, and he asked me to give you this. He held out the envelope. June looked at it and did not take it. She had spent 31 years being underpaid for the most intimate kind of work. She knew the particular ache of laboring in a field that the world does not properly value. She also knew the way people sometimes arrived with checks and envelopes as a way of making something feel finished, settled, over. She didn't want to be paid for what she had done. She hadn't done it for payment. Mr. Hines, June said, I appreciate you coming all the way out here, but I don't need anything for what happened. I just helped because he needed help. That's all it was. Darrell Hines nodded, like he'd expected that, like maybe Russell Vane had told him to expect exactly that. Ma'am, I understand. He said you might say something like that. He wanted me to tell you that this isn't payment. He said. He was very specific. He said the only reason he's able to say these exact words right now is because of you. He said please read the letter before you decide. June looked at the envelope again. She took it. She sat down at the kitchen table. Her oatmeal was still on the burner. She turned it off and sat with the envelope for a moment before she opened it. Inside was a single handwritten letter and a business card. The letter was written in a deliberate, slanted hand. The handwriting of someone for whom writing had become effortful. Maybe recently. Deliberate strokes. Careful spacing. It said, Mrs. Calloway, I don't know how to properly thank a stranger for saving your life, so I'm going to try something different. I'm going to tell you the truth. I have been thinking about what you did every day since Wednesday. Not because it was dramatic, because it was simple. You saw me and you stopped. I have been a wealthy man for 40 years. I have built buildings and funded endowments and written my name on plaques, and in 40 years I have never felt as visible as I felt when you knelt down on that floor and said, look at me, right here. My company builds affordable senior housing. We have been trying for 2 years to find the right community liaison for a new project on the east side. Someone who knows what people in those communities actually need, not what a boardroom thinks they need. I believe that's you. Please call the number on the card. I would like to have a conversation, nothing more. If you say no after the conversation, I'll respect that completely. What I won't do is pretend that Wednesday didn't happen. That seems dishonest, and I don't have enough years left to be dishonest about things that matter. June read the letter twice. She set it on the table. She sat with it for a long time. Her oatmeal was cold by the time Darrell Hines, still waiting patiently on the porch, heard her voice through the screen door. Mr. Hines, would you like some coffee while I find my phone? His name was Russell Vane, and he had built Vane Development Group from a single 2-family property he bought in 1981 with money borrowed from his brother-in-law. 40 years, 12 states, affordable and mixed-income housing. He had received 7 awards and 1 lawsuit, and given 2 commencement speeches he never felt qualified to give. He was 74, widowed 5 years prior, with 1 adult son who lived in Portland and called twice a week without fail. He had not told his son about Wednesday. Not yet. He didn't want the conversation to be about how he should stop driving himself places. He knew that conversation was coming. He just wasn't ready. What he was ready for was June Calloway. They met in his office on Tuesday afternoon. Not a boardroom. His actual office, the one with the window overlooking the parking lot, and the framed photograph of the first building he ever finished. A 3-story apartment building in Cincinnati. He pointed it out when she arrived. She asked how many units. He said 16. She nodded, like that was the right answer. She had brought a notepad. He noticed. He told her about the East Side project. 64 units. Senior-specific design. Lower rents. Common spaces built for community, not aesthetics. A resource office that would actually connect residents to services they needed. Meals, transportation, health aides, legal help for people trying to navigate Medicare and Social Security. and all the systems that had a way of confusing people precisely when they could least afford to be confused. He said, I've had 3 meetings with consultants this year. They talk about demographics and utilization rates. I don't need that. I need someone who has sat in those apartments. Who knows what people actually need at 70, at 75, at 80? Who will tell me when I'm wrong? June had her notepad open. She had written 2 things: resource office hours and transportation partnerships. She said, the resource office needs evening hours. People in those buildings don't always have family who can take time off work during the day to help them navigate paperwork. You need someone there on Tuesday and Thursday evenings at minimum. Russell said, done, she said. And transportation isn't just about getting to appointments. It's about getting to a grocery store that isn't a corner market. You'd be surprised how many people in senior housing are quietly malnourished because the nearest real grocery store is a 40-minute bus ride. He wrote that down. She noticed. They talked for 2 hours. When she stood to leave, he stood too. He said, I want to offer you the position. Community liaison, full salary, benefits. And I want you on the design committee for the East Side building. Not as a consultant, as a decision maker. June stood by the door. She thought about Patrice, stretched thin and exhausted, working 2 jobs in a brick house with 1987 wallpaper. She thought about Gerald, about the photograph on the nightstand, about 31 years of work the world had never properly named. She said, I want something in writing about the evening hours before I sign anything. Russell almost smiled. It was the first time she'd seen something close to warmth from him, past the formality. He said, my assistant will have it ready by Thursday. She said, then we have a deal. She did not shake his hand. She was still figuring out whether she liked him. That would take a few more weeks. But she believed him, and that was enough to start. What happened over the next 6 months was the kind of change that doesn't look like change from a distance. There were no ribbon cuttings yet, no news cameras, just work. The quiet, grinding, productive kind that June had always known better than anyone. She attended every design meeting. She pushed back 3 times in the first month alone. Once, about the placement of a common room that would have gotten afternoon sun in the winter and been unusable by August. Once about a door handle specification that looked fine on a blueprint and would have been nearly impossible for someone with arthritis. Once about the resource office location, which had been tucked into a back hallway where June said, flatly, that no one with any pride would walk to ask for help. They moved it to the front, with good lighting and a window. Each time Russell listened. Each time he changed the plan. His lead architect, a precise young man named Terrence, said after the 3rd meeting, she sees things we're not trained to see. Russell said, that's why she's here. Patrice found out on a Thursday evening when June set a folder on the kitchen table next to the dinner plates. Patrice opened it. She looked at the number at the top of the offer letter. She looked at it again. She looked at her mother. Mama, what is this? A job offer. This? She pointed at the number. This is more than I make, combined. June poured herself a glass of water. She said, I know. Patrice put the folder down. Her eyes were filling up, which embarrassed her. So she looked at the ceiling for a moment, the way people do when they're trying to hold something back. She said, you went to pick up fish oil. I forgot the fish oil, June said. Patrice made a sound that was almost a laugh and almost something else, and then she reached across the table and put her hand over her mother's and held it. They sat like that for a while. June started on a Monday. She drove herself. Her hip protested the stairs in the parking garage, and she took them slowly, and she did not apologize for it, and she did not rush. She had a desk with a window. On her first day, she put 2 things on it, a notepad and a photograph of Gerald, taken in 1989 at a barbecue, laughing at something off camera. The East Side project broke ground 11 months after that pharmacy floor. June was there, hard hat, work boots borrowed from Patrice's closet because Patrice had always bought practical shoes, standing in a field in the cold watching the first machines move the first dirt. Russell was there too. He stood next to her, They had become, over those 11 months, something June did not have a clean word for. Colleagues, yes, but also something that happened when two people in their 70s, who have both lost someone, build something together. A mutual recognition, a shorthand. He told her once that she reminded him of his late wife, and she told him that she would take that as a compliment, only if he told her something specific his wife used to do that drove him crazy. He thought about it and said she used to hum while she read, completely unconsciously, and it was both endearing and maddening. June said that Gerald used to narrate television programs out loud even when she was in the room. Watching with him, Russell said, "See, now we understand each other." At the groundbreaking, there was a small ceremony, local officials, a few journalists, the kind of modest press a good project gets when it doesn't have celebrity attached. Russell spoke briefly. He thanked his team. He thanked the city. Then he paused and said he wanted to thank the person who had reminded him that the reason to build anything was the same reason to stop on any given afternoon and help someone who had fallen. Because we are either the kind of people who stop, or we aren't, and the buildings we build are just the physical evidence of which kind we decided to be. He didn't name her. He hadn't asked if he could, and she hadn't offered. But Terence, standing next to June, leaned over and said quietly, "He's talking about you." June said, "I know." She watched the machines move the dirt. On the folding table behind the ceremony, there were coffee cups and a small sheet cake that said Vane East Side Initiative in blue frosting. June got a piece and ate it standing up. It was too sweet. She thought Gerald would have eaten 2 pieces and then complained about being too full. She almost told Terence this, and then decided he didn't need to know about Gerald yet. 6 months after the groundbreaking, the first residents began moving in. 62 of the 64 units filled within 40 days. Average age, 73. June spent the first 3 Saturdays after opening walking the building with a clipboard. Not inspecting. Introducing herself. Knocking on doors. Telling residents that the resource office was on the first floor, near the front, with good lighting, and she would be there on Tuesday and Thursday evenings. An older woman on the 3rd floor, whose name was Gertrude, and who had lived alone since her husband's death 4 years prior, opened her door in a bathrobe at 11 in the morning and looked at June with the particular wariness of someone who has been promised things before and learned not to trust the promises. She said, "What do you actually do here?" June said, "Whatever you need." That's the honest answer. Gertrude looked at her for a long moment. Then she opened the door wider and said, "I need help understanding my Medicare supplement. I've been paying into something I don't think I need and nobody will explain it to me." June said, "Let me come in." She sat at Gertrude's kitchen table for 90 minutes. When she left, Gertrude's supplement situation was documented, explained, and escalated to a contact at the state insurance office. There was also a follow-up appointment on the calendar for the following Tuesday. Gertrude stood in the doorway and watched her go. She said, "You're not what I expected." June said, "What did you expect? Someone with pamphlets?" June laughed. She had a good laugh, the unguarded kind. She said, "I have pamphlets, but I left them downstairs because I figured I'd see how the first conversation went." Gertrude almost smiled. She said, "Come back Tuesday." June said, "I'll be here." She continued down the hallway. At the end of it there was a window overlooking the east side street below. It was an ordinary street. Gas station on the corner. A laundromat. A bus stop with a cracked bench where 2 people were sitting in the late morning cold. June stood at the window for a moment and looked at it. She thought about Wednesdays. Her Wednesdays at the grocery store, the library book, the tea at the little cafe table. She still had them. She had negotiated for them quietly, in a conversation with Russell 2 weeks before she started. He had said, of course, and not made it complicated. She thought about Patrice, who had cried at the kitchen table on a Thursday evening, and who had texted her that morning, just, "Proud of you, Mama." She thought about Russell, who would send her an email tonight with 3 questions about the resource office scheduling that she had already thought about, and would have answers for tomorrow. She thought about Gertrude, who needed pamphlets, but had needed the conversation more. She thought about Gerald. She thought about him the way she always thought about him. The way you think about someone who is simply part of how you understand the world. She thought about what he would say right now, standing at this window. He would probably name the street. He would probably know something about its history, some piece of local trivia he had read somewhere, because that was Gerald. He would tell her and she would only half listen, and then remember it fully 3 weeks later when it became useful. She put her hand on the cold glass of the window. 64 units, 2 evenings a week, 1 resource office with good lighting and a window at the front. It was not by any measure of the world that counted large things, a large thing. Nobody would put her name on a building. The plaque on the resource office said Vane Community Services. Not her name, but Gertrude would come on Tuesday. And someone else would come on Thursday. And then someone else. And over time the thing that June had always known, and never been credited for knowing, that people need someone to sit at the table with them, not over them, and not walk past them, would become, quietly, the whole point of the place. The bus stop outside had a cracked bench. Someone was sitting on it alone now, the other person gone. June watched them for a moment. She didn't know who they were or what they needed. She couldn't help from up here. But she thought, if I were down there, and I saw someone sit down next to them, I'd know exactly what kind of person that was. I keep thinking about that pharmacy aisle, about the 12 people who were there and didn't stop. 12. And I think about June, with her bad hip and her borrowed grocery list, who got down on the floor anyway. She didn't stop because she had extra time. She was on her feet for 40 minutes and she could feel it. She didn't stop because it was easy. Nothing about that floor was easy. She stopped because somewhere in 31 years of showing up for people, stopping had become who she was, not what she did. Who she was. There's a version of this story where June goes home with her groceries, her hip aching, and she feels fine about it. Because 12 other people didn't stop either. Because she's 71 and she's done enough. Because nobody would blame her. And I wonder sometimes how many of our best selves live in that version of events. The version where we let ourselves off the hook because everyone else did too. June didn't live there. She never had. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And I want to ask you honestly, not in a way that needs an answer, but in a way that deserves one. If you had been in that aisle, would you have stopped? Drop it in the comments. I mean it. Because I think most people want to believe they would. And I think the truth is more complicated than that. And I think the gap between those two things is exactly where we grow. Like this video, subscribe, hit the bell. Because stories like June's, quiet, unheroic, true, those are the ones that deserve to be found. Here's what I take from June. She didn't wait until she was comfortable. She was never comfortable. 31 years of work that the world underpaid and undernamed. And she never waited for the world to tell her it mattered before she kept going. She just kept going. That's not resilience in the motivational poster sense. That's something older and quieter than that. That's someone who decided, at some point early enough, that she doesn't even remember deciding it, that the measure of a day was what you did in it, not what you received. Some of us are still waiting to receive something before we start. Waiting until we have enough, feel enough, are recognized enough. But June went to the pharmacy floor on her bad hip with $38 worth of grocery supplies in her cart and nobody watching, and she said, "Look at me, right here. You don't have to have a lot to give a lot." She proved it. She's been proving it for 50 years. The only question is whether you'll prove it too.